welcome all of you tonight to the Northern Rockies Nature Forum. And hopefully you've heard, seen publicity on it in the newspaper or even on television, as I understand. This is a series of free, community-oriented discussions on the ecology, biodiversity, restoration, and future of the natural landscapes of the Northern Rockies. It's hosted by Native Forest Network and also by a U of M student group called Environmental Action Community. I'm Vicki Watson from the U of M Environmental Studies program, and I've been asked to moderate this discussion. So if everybody would agree to be moderate, and or at least as moderate as circumstances and your conscience dictates in this case, we'll get on with tonight's forum, which is entitled Perspectives on Watershed Restoration, Solutions at Work. So hopefully we're going to get to hear some solutions that are being applied in the local area. The format of this forum and others is a series of short presentations by an expert panel who will limit their expertise to about 10 to 15 minutes each. And then that will be followed by an hour of moderated question and answer with the audience. The next forum, which I hope you'll try to make, is the Healthy Forest Policy and On-the-Ground Look. And that will take place again on a Tuesday night on October 25th, same time, same place. Before we proceed with the panel, I'd like to point out something that I suspect many of you are already aware of, and that is that even in the last best place, watersheds are in a lot of trouble. In the Clark Fork Basin, over half, about 55% of the basin's stream miles are considered to be impaired. That is, not fully supporting their beneficial uses. Only about 14% are considered to be fully supporting their beneficial uses, and the rest, we don't have enough information to say for sure. Montana's watersheds as a group are probably in about similar shape to the Clark Fork Basin. Now, I don't want to suggest that we need watershed restoration quite as radical as depicted in this Monty Dolak print, which shows the restoration of Glacial Lake Missoula on the top of Missoula here. But we are going to see a very historic restoration in the form of the restoration of the confluence of the Blackfoot and Clark Fork rivers with the removal of Milltown Dam and an attempt to renaturalize that confluence as much as possible. So for the next 10 years, we're going to see, quite an amazing restoration carried out just upstream of town here. A while back, I attempted to calculate all the money that was being spent on restoration projects in the Clark Fork Basin, from the Superfund work and restoration work to work being done by the tribes and various government agencies and the big companies that manage the reservoirs down at the bottom of the river, all the fisheries restoration work that they're paying for, the voluntary nutrient reduction plan on the Clark Fork, many, many small projects. And when I got up to about $1 billion, I gave up and stopped adding up. But a lot of money and a lot of people's time and effort is going into watershed restoration in the Clark Fork Basin. And we have some people here tonight who are carrying out some of that work. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Bethanie Walder on the end down there, standing in for Marnie Criley of Wildland CPR. Won't be able to be here tonight. She is ill. Bethanie is the Executive Director of Wildland CPR. And Wildland CPR revives and protects wild places by preventing new wildland road construction, promoting watershed restoration through road removal, and limiting off-road vehicle use. Wildland CPR also works at a national level, acting as a clearinghouse on these types of issues. Bethanie received her Master's in Environmental Studies right here at U of M. I'm going to introduce all the panelists first and give each one of them an opportunity to say what they'd like to say. The person who will speak next in order is Shane Russell Hendrickson, who is a fisheries biologist with the Lolo National Forest. He was born and raised here in western Montana. He's a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe. While he was attending high school in Arlee, he worked out at the Jocko River Hatchery, and he received a BS in wildlife biology here at U of M. and has since worked as a fisheries biologist, first with the Helena National Forest and now with Lolo National Forest. He's participated in Montana's best management practice audit teams and also worked with Lolo and Blackfoot River watershed groups. Our next panelist is Lloyd. She's a hydrologist with the Nez Perce tribe and has worked on watershed restoration projects in partnership with the Clearwater National Forest. She has a degree in environmental science from Washington University and also a master's degree in water resources from Indiana University. And our last speaker here, the tall guy on the end here, John Zelazney, the Executive Director of Montana Trout, which funds trout habitat restoration. Montana Trout's an independent, Missoula-based nonprofit, not to be confused with Trout Unlimited, separate group. Montana Trout has done trout habitat projects on 2 Blackfoot River tributaries, on Paddy Creek here in Missoula, and most recently on Lolo Creek. Like me, John was born in Texas. We weren't lucky enough to be born in Montana, but we got here just as soon as we could. He has a BS in biology and an MS in environmental studies. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Bethany, and we're going to be handing off this little mic here.
Thank you, Vicki, and thanks Native Forest Network. And again, Marnie sends her apologies that she couldn't be here. So I'll try to take over for her. I'd like to start by just talking a little bit about what restoration is. There's been a lot of debate in the newspapers, on the radio, and throughout the country about restoration, specifically forest restoration and watershed restoration. And so I find that's a pretty interesting debate, and I looked up the word restoration in the dictionary. And there's 2 main definitions of restoration, and one of those is basically to restore something back to what it used to be. And another definition of restoration is to restore something to a functional state or a dynamic state. Those are 2 really different definitions. And I think that we've seen in the restoration debate that's playing out in the media and especially among land managers, a lot of focus on restoring something back to what it used to be. And I think you're going to hear a lot from the people talking tonight more about restoring something to a functional state or a dynamic state of being where it can handle the different things that are happening like drought and global climate change. So when we think about restoring something back to what it used to be, a lot of the debate tends to focus on logging issues. And we think about restoring something back to a functional state. One of the easiest ways to think about restoration is to remove the barriers to a functioning ecosystem. And in my view, there are 4 main barriers to functioning ecosystem. And those are cows, weeds, dams, and roads. Again, 4 main barriers, things that stop a natural ecosystem from functioning the way it should: cows, weeds, dams, and roads. So how do we think about restoration then in terms of what you would go out and do next? How do you define what you're going to do to restore a system to a functioning state? A couple of years ago, a group of conservationists and community-based forestry practitioners got together, and they took about 2 years and put together a series of restoration principles. And those principles ended up covering 3 key things. There's an ecological principle, an economic principle, and a community workforce principle. So what they were looking at in these restoration principles is how do we look at restoration from a really holistic perspective so that we have an opportunity not just to restore the land, but to restore the communities that depend on that land. So how would restoration look on the ground if you were going to focus on restoring communities and you were going to focus on removing the barriers to a functioning ecosystem? The organization I work with, Wildland CPR, focuses on just one of those barriers, and that barrier is roads. And one of the things that we do is we promote road removal or watershed restoration through road removal. And I think you're going to hear a lot from the other people talking tonight about how you actually do road removal, so I'm not going to go into the details of that, and probably Becca has pictures to show and lots of fun things that you'll hear about. But I'd like to talk about how road removal has an opportunity not just to restore the land, but also to restore the communities that depend on that land. A couple of years ago, the Forest Service started a process to look at how to manage roads and how to manage roadless areas. And a lot of you have probably heard about the roadless rule that came out of that. But in addition to the roadless rule, there was also a road rule. And not necessarily a rule, but a new transportation policy for the Forest Service. And that transportation policy calls for the removal of between 140,000 and 186,000 miles of roads throughout the National Forest System. These are the Forest Service's own plans for what they want to do to get to what they consider to be the minimal road system needed to manage the forests effectively. It also is a really great opportunity to restore those forests because roads have very significant impacts on ecosystems. They act as a barrier to water function, they impact wildlife species, they have particular impacts on fish. So it's very important from a watershed perspective to deal with the roads. If you were to remove 140 to 186,000 miles of roads over about 20 to 40 years, which is what the Forest Service initially estimated, you could actually create about 3,000 jobs per year nationally. It turns out that the Forest Service isn't investing nearly enough money to remove all those roads, and so we're not creating that many jobs either. But it is something that we have a potential to do, and those jobs would be local jobs in local rural communities, and they're high-skilled, high-wage jobs, which means they would be enough to provide a family with a decent living. Wildland CPR conducted a study a couple of years ago to determine how much it would cost to actually implement this plan that the Forest Service defined. And I have copies of the study in the back. It's called Investing in Communities, Investing in the Land. And what the study found is that it would cost about $90 million a year to actually do the amount of road removal that the Forest Service said it wanted to do in the time frame they defined. Since the changing of Forest Service chiefs, since changing the presidency, we've seen the investment in road removal decline significantly and steadily, so there's less investment happening. And it's also forced both land managers and private interests to get really creative about funding this kind of work. But we've also seen that it's very effective work and that communities do support it once it starts happening on the ground. For example, in Humboldt County, and this goes beyond road removal, in Humboldt County between 1995 and 2002, more than $65 million was generated for restoration work within the county. And it's kind of like what Vicki was talking about with all the different things she calculated in this region and stopped when she got to $1 billion. They didn't quite get to $1 billion in Humboldt County, Vicki. But what they've calculated with specific investment in restoration in Humboldt County is that it provides approximately 300 jobs a year just in that county alone. The restoration program in Humboldt County integrates ecosystem reinvestment, knowledge generation, place-based commitment to environmental stewardship, and community development. And it's generating funding from tribes, from state government, from federal government, and from private interests. It's actually a very significant economic generator, or it's a very significant component of the economic system in Humboldt County. And it really provides a model for other places throughout the country. There is a link on our website to a study that was done that goes into a lot more detail about Humboldt County. If people are interested in that, you can check that out. As another example of a community that's investing in restoration that may be a little more familiar to people, it's the city of Seattle. The Cedar River Watershed is the clean water source for Seattle. And a couple of years ago, they were looking at how to maintain their clean water, and they were faced with the potential to invest millions and millions of dollars in creating a water filtration system for the city. But there were some pretty forward-thinking people who were looking at what they were going to do to maintain their clean water, and they basically took an alternative approach. And what they decided to do was to invest $6 million over the next 20 years to remove approximately 200 miles of roads from the Cedar River watershed. There in the Cedar River, it's costing them about $30,000 a mile to remove the roads. And their alternative was a multi-million-dollar wastewater treatment plant, just to build it, not counting probably more than $1 million a year to keep it operating. If the city calculated correctly, they'll save millions and millions of dollars, they'll restore their watershed, they'll put people to work over the next 20 years doing that, and they won't need a water filtration system at all. So again, it's thinking about how do we maintain functional states, a functional state of our ecosystem, how do we maintain a dynamic ecosystem that can deal with floods, that can deal with drought, that can deal with climate change, and that can still provide the ecosystem services that the Cedar River watershed provides to the city of Seattle. So I think I'm going to close there and leave my talk short and let the other folks give you more examples of on-the-ground work that's happening in Idaho and in Montana, where you can see really what happens when you do remove roads. If you're interested in more information, we have newsletters, and again, I brought about 20 copies of this report, and it goes through all sorts of details of why to remove roads, and also when you remove them, what kind of benefits it can create for your local community. Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight. Excuse me. And again, my name is Hendrickson. I'm a fisheries biologist with the Lowell National Forest. I've been either a fisheries biologist trainee or an actual biologist for the last 15 years now. I still consider myself mainly in that trainee category most of the time. It seems that constantly learning new things, especially when it comes to watershed restoration. So I'll just jump right into this. I've got about 20, 25 slides, and I might have to fly through a couple of these. So if we need to come back to them later in the hour, we can definitely do that. This quick outline, discuss and define what watershed restoration is, watershed assessments and what they do for you in prioritization of watershed restoration techniques, and then I'm just going to touch into some of the implementation costs and give some examples that I've been involved with on the Lowell, and then just really briefly talk about monitoring, and then finish with the summary. So this is my biased definition of watershed restoration, basically returning an undesirable existing condition to desired future condition at a defined scale. And you could also probably throw a timeline to that also. How soon do you want to do that? Never did get around to adding that part. And some quick examples of that, maybe sediment levels, road densities. It could even be some vegetation types. You want to change it from a Doug fir into more of a shrub component, or it's broader than just watershed fish hydrology. Watershed restoration can be huge. So what I'm talking about is a real narrow focus, a real narrow component of watershed restoration, more towards a fisheries and hydrology bias. And then I wanted to define mitigation. Restoration and mitigation are often confused. I'll often find people thinking that doing some BMP work to a road is called restoration. And so I looked it up, looked in Webster, and it's to lessen the force or intensity to make it less severe. So that's not quite the same spin as what a watershed restoration definition might be. So watershed assessments. And watershed assessments are basically a process that can help you define what the problem is. Not necessarily the symptom, but the problem. What's causing that symptom to occur? If sedimentation is an issue in your watershed, what's causing that sedimentation? You want to use that watershed assessment to help you try to figure that out. And also it should identify the scale. Is it this watershed, is it the bigger watershed, or is it the bigger watershed within that? So that assessment will identify that scale as well. And it should be done in an interdisciplinary manner. And what I mean, not just the fish biologists doing that. It should be the hydrologists, the fisheries people, the engineers, and more so, this is a little Forest Service bias coming out. These are all Forest Service positions. But also other groups, watershed groups, private landowners, other agencies. And you should really look at the true watershed. And that way you can identify the most important component out there that needs to be restored. And that can be done through identifying the existing condition. And right after that, you can identify the desired future condition. And those differences can be an opportunity. And again, the whole basis, in my opinion, of the watershed assessment is to identify the reason for the symptoms. Not necessarily the symptoms. A lot of times we know what those symptoms are, but you need to go back and find out what's causing those. And you can do that through this process. And I'm just going to jump into some quick examples of not necessarily watershed restoration, but pieces of assessments that I've done that can go into a watershed restoration. And I'm going to show different kinds, GIS analysis, culvert assessments, and so forth. And real quickly, this is an inventory of culverts across the northern region. The red dots are barriers to upstream juvenile cutthroat passage. The green dots are fish friendly. And you can't really see some of the gray dots in there, but those are kind of undetermined. There's not enough data to make or break it one way or the other. So this is not necessarily a watershed assessment, but this may be a piece of data that can go into a watershed assessment. And again, I'm going to be very biased towards the fisheries end and realize this is just a small piece of what a watershed assessment could be. There's a whole engineering side, there's a whole recreation component, timber component, and again, I'm just focusing on a very narrow aspect of it. This is a quick and dirty GIS exercise we did on the Lowell National Forest on habitat for bull trout down in 1998. The salmon-colored hugs that you're seeing on here are functioning at unacceptable risk, and the green are functioning at risk. So that's kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum. And the scale of this is actually at a 6-code watershed level, which is the smaller polygons that you're seeing on the map, but it's done at the Lowell National Forest scale. So that's just to give you an example. And this was totally a GIS exercise. This wasn't based on any physical data, but road densities, stream crossing numbers, that kind of thing within each other. So that, again, it's just an example of one of the pieces of data that could go into a watershed analysis or assessment. And this is another one that when you integrate the habitat and the species together, what that might look like. Same scale, same huck. And to step that down a little bit, for a long time the forest did what was called the R1, R4 habitat assessments. So now we're looking very narrow. We're looking down at the stream reach level versus these huge watersheds. We're looking very specific. And this is just an example of comparing the existing condition to the reference condition. We're starting to get down to what the symptoms are. And you can see in this top graph that, the pool area, the current pool area is less than that of the reference condition. So that's giving you a symptom. And now you can back up to that first slide and maybe help try to figure out what's causing that symptom. So there's a lot of different steps that you can take to help help you further identify the symptoms and what's the causative agent of those symptoms. And this is just basically a table form of some of that other information, and this can help try to identify those causes. So if you have high fine sediment in your systems, you can start looking at road densities, number of stream crossings, how much sensitive landscape that has roads, how close are those roads to the streams, and there's just all kinds of ways you can run these analyses. So in the watershed assessment, hopefully you have some goals and objectives that are going to correct those opportunities we talked about. And those opportunities can be identified as a goal and objective, which might be to reduce stream sediments. Sediment that is less than a quarter inch that may impact spawning, egg incubation. And some of those objectives may be to reduce road densities, reduce the number of stream crossings, and roads that are going to stay on the landscape we need to bring up to DMP standards. And this is the Lowell National Forest road decommissioning table or levels of decommissioning. Just quickly going to go over this. The level 1 on top is very simple road closure. we just basically put a gate on it, maybe scarify the road surface, seed and fertilize it. And I'm just going to jump to the bottom. To be quick about this, the level 5 is where we totally take that road off the face of the earth. It's gone. We use an excavator and totally obliterate that road. So and this is very helpful when it comes to meeting other objectives that we may want to be back in on that road in the near future. So we'll do less of a closure. And if we never need that road again, we'll do more of a closure. So this is a really great tool for us to use to meet multiple objectives. And quickly, just to dive into a little bit of the costs, these costs are going to be hugely variable depending on time of year. If China decides to build another dam, it's just amazing what influences prices. So these prices are relative. For those type 3, 4, 5 closures, those are the costs that generally we start with anyway. Road upgrades, when we decide to leave a road on the landscape, we want to upgrade those with the best management practices and try to minimize the amount of sedimentation coming off that road system and being delivered to our stream channels. And the way we do that is through installing surface drainage, which could be rolling dips, belt tops, open tops, ditch relief, slash filter windrows, installing sediment basins where we can't get the correct ditch drainage in, basically trying to settle some of the sediment before it enters the stream. And those are some of the associated costs that go with that. And roughly our average cost is around $10,000 a mile to do these BMP upgrades. So another watershed restoration goal and objective might be to increase fish passage at stream crossings. And we can do that through either identifying we no longer need the road and the associated stream crossing and just pull it, or if we do need that structure, we can replace it with aquatic organism passage structure, which is basically stream simulation. And this is just a quick example of what that might look like. And these costs range from $25,000, really limitless, once you get into kind of the federal highway standard. But most of our cost ranges are in that $2,500 to $25,000 range per structure. Road maintenance, again, we decided to leave a road on the landscape. We've already brought it up to BMPs, like we hope, or not, if we can't afford to do it. You still need to maintain the road regardless. And these are some of the annual or semi-annual or every other year type costs that might be associated with maintaining that road. You got to blade it. You want to put a roller back on there to recompact that road surface. We have erosion on our road fill at our culvert inlets and outlets. Those require rip-wrapping occasionally. And there's the range of costs from $300 to $2,200 a mile. And again, I'm not sure that those are really additive, but I'm trying to do that. Another goal might be to decrease bank erosion and in-stream instability. So we're getting a channel that's whipping around. It's got no vegetation to hold the banks together. And we have to go in there and reestablish that stability. And the price range from this is, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So these are quite expensive projects. And I put in quotes there, in parentheses, the heavy stream restoration projects. You can obviously do smaller projects for less cost, or less intense projects. So I threw a bunch of numbers out there, and I wanted to put those into perspective of what our budget is to do these kinds of things. If you look at the wildlife budget, the fisheries budget, our hydrology budget, engineering budget, those are roughly the numbers that we have been getting in probably the last 3 to 5 years. Well, actually, we're projected to get those again for this year. But roughly, $30,000 per unit, wildlife fisheries, watershed engineering gets a little more and not all of that is put towards, particularly engineering components, not necessarily put right into restoration work. A lot of that engineering dollars goes into this work. But I wanted to, kind of stack the odds and stack the money up to show even when we total that out, that's not a lot of money to do good restoration work. And there's We have an Upper Lola Roads project, which John may talk about later on today, which is a road restoration project where we're obliterating and upgrading roads. And that one road project is estimated at $1.5 million. Monitoring, I'm going to just quickly, this is a whole topic on itself, but basically it comes down to implementation monitoring. Did you do what you said you were going to do? And then from the effective, was it effective? Was it the right thing to do in the right place at the right time? And this is just a graph of some of the monitoring that I've done on a culvert removal project that I had a couple of years ago. And we can come back to this one later on to further discuss that. So with limited dollars, partnerships becomes very critical to get watershed restoration accomplished. And there's just some quick examples that we've done in the Lola National Forest, the Dunham Creek restoration. We restored 7,000 feet of stream channel. Cottonwood Culvert is a partnership. We're going to replace a fish barrier culvert with an aquatic organism passage culvert, and the Rattlesnake Dam, which is a fish passage issue as well. So in summary, good restorations are really dependent on good assessments and identifying the cause and the symptom, and then prioritizing those, because there's obviously going to be more that we can afford to do any given year, and that'll help prioritize, if not within one group, but multiple groups within the watershed. And then monitoring. Monitoring is fairly crucial, and it's often our least funded activity. And are we doing the right thing in the right place at the right time? And partnerships will continue to be crucial to accomplish projects on the ground. That's it.
Hi, I'm Lloyd, and I work for the Nez Perce Tribe, and as Vicki said earlier, I work in partnership with the Clearwater National Forest. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about everything that Bethanie and Shana talked about, wrapped up into a case study. Talk about how we've set our goals to try to achieve and restore ecosystem function, and then go through the steps that Shane outlined for how it looks on the ground when we're doing a project. One of the unique things about this program is it is a partnership, and it's been a partnership from the beginning, and we really started working in 1996. Partnership to me on the Clearwater, that works, we plan our projects together, we develop all the logistics of the project together, we prioritize, and we find funding together, and we implement the project and monitor it together. And it's not all that common for a tribal organization and a federal agency to work so seamlessly together, but it really does work in our program. So when you hear me say we, I'm not just talking about the Nez Perce Tribe, I'm talking about we as in the Clearwater National Forest and the Nez Perce Tribe. And if there's goals that we have independent of each other, I'll try to be careful and articulate this as the Clearwater National Forest, the goal is this. The Nez Perce Tribe's goal is this. Most of our goals are all in common. So why is the Nez Perce Tribe working on the Clearwater National Forest? The Clearwater National Forest is part of the Nez Perce Tribe Treaty Territory. You'll also hear people refer to it as the ceded lands, based on the Treaty of 1855. In that treaty, the Nez Perce Tribe reserved for themselves the right to use their resources on that land for perpetuity. In the 70s, federal courts decided other like treaties with other Columbia Basin tribes meant, well, the tribe would never have reserved those rights for themselves if they didn't intend to have those rights for perpetuity, and the courts rated the tribes as on an equal playing field to the federal government as managers of the resources on that land. It's a map of the treaty territory. I don't have a pointer, but if you look at the outermost line, the pink and orange line, that's the whole 13 million acres. It encompasses 7 national forests, and I work here in the pink area on the Clearwater National Forest, up in the headwaters of the Loxaw River drainage. The Nez Perce Tribe defines our goals as a ridgetop to ridgetop watershed program. So we try to plan our programs encompassing all parts of the watershed, but we really do prioritize where we work by fisheries value, much like Shane was talking about, as well as cultural resource value. So we get our money mainly from two organizations associated with salmon recovery. The first is Bonneville Power Administration. They're the power brokers for the hydro system on the Columbia. They're required by federal law to provide mitigation dollars for the impacts to salmon of the hydro system. We compete for those dollars across the Columbia Basin. And we also get money, which is federally appropriated dollars, from Idaho Pacific Salmon Recovery Fund. Together, those two funding entities provide about 99% of my funding. I also have a small amount of money from Title II, those are federally appropriated dollars, to counties in Idaho, and the National Forest Foundation, which is also federally appropriated dollars that you can match with non-federal money. Like I said, we began work in 1996 with a focus on road removal. And I'll talk to you about why that was our focus as we get into the presentation. And you'll hear a lot of terms, and I tend to use them interchangeably. Road removal to me means road decommissioning, and it also means road obliteration. But since we started in '96, I started just with the term with road obliteration. The field of taking roads off Forest Service maps has gotten quite a bit more administrative. And now when the Forest Service is referring to road decommissioning, that's a road they're no longer counting as a road on the Forest Service map. So if they just put a gate up, they're still saying it's not a road anymore. No more money goes into maintenance. On the Clearwater National Forest, road decommissioning means road obliteration or road removal, which is the level 5 that Shane was talking about. Totally recontouring the road. It's what we do. We're actually making it look like a mountain again. Since 2000, we started really expanding the scope of the kinds of restoration work that we do, but we're still really focused on the problems associated with roads and locksaw. Here's an area map. This is, you can see the outline of the borders with the treaty territory. The tan subbasin, that's the Clearwater subbasin. It's an anadromous fisheries basin. That means we have the ocean-going fish. We have Chinook salmon, spring Chinook salmon there, steelhead. We also have some important indicator resident fish like bull trout and westlope cutthroat trout. My project area is in the headwaters of the Locksaw. You can refer to it as the upper Locksaw. The shaded areas are where I have work on the ground. The terrain of the Locksaw is very steep, dissected breakland, granitic slopes. We get anywhere from 60 to 80 inches of precipitation a year, and we have a lot of landslides occur naturally on that kind of landscape. The major impact to the watersheds in the Locksaw is past logging activities. We have a legacy of very high road densities. It's not unusual to have 20 miles per square mile of road in a watershed, not more. And what was left behind on those roads are numerous failing drainage structures, most of them log culverts. So what happened to start our program? In 1995 and 1996, there were two subsequent, what hydrologists call rain-on-snow events. We had a lot of snow, and right following the snow, the temperatures warmed up and we got a lot of rain. What happened was all that snowpack melted in a matter of about 2 days. That kind of magnitude of storm doesn't happen very often, maybe once every 30 years on the Clearwater. On the Clearwater we had floods. I think there were floods in Missoula too, but the floods all over the Clearwater National Forest and a massive landslide event. So we did a landslide analysis following the event. We found that nearly 60% of those landslides initiated from logging roads. And most of those slides came from abandoned, overgrown logging roads that no one even knew were roads anymore. They've been forgotten about. So here's what we learned, that just because a road was revegetated, as you can see, that's my field partner Phyllis, she's sitting on the road there. That's typical of what a road looked like that failed. Didn't mean it was stable. It looked restored. It looked in native condition, but it wasn't functioning like a restored ecosystem would function. As long as there are structures in place that interrupted the watershed function, mainly those are culverts and unmaintained drainage structures, the road still failed. So what were the mechanics that happened? And I'm going to walk over here and see if I can point. This is very typical of a road built for logging in the Clearwater. It's called side cast construction. Mainly they were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. The dotted line here is natural ground. So this would have been natural ground before the dozer came in. The dozer came in and built what we call the road ditch. So, and he cast this natural ground material over the side. That became the fill slope, and then the cut slope is the upper side. The blue arrow represents subsurface flow. It's all over the Clearwater. It's a very wet area. When the dozers cut into that road, they converted subsurface flow to surface flow and created massive drainage problems for the entire road system because there was no drainage in place. In a low water year, normal water year, you get it ponds up a little bit and you've altered the hydrology of the hill slope, but you really haven't created a failure problem until you have a high runoff year. And then what happens is this whole fill slope gets saturated because there's no place for the water to drain. This is a compacted surface and the water can't infiltrate. The fill slope is steeper than natural ground, and it's a trigger point for all our failures. So we had failures start at ridge tops, and we have such high road densities there. They go through 13 to 20 roads, and by the time they get to the salmon stream, they're carrying thousands and thousands of yards of cubic sediment right into the stream. So we decided we had a problem with roads, and that really started our program. The whole focus when we started was we have to get rid of these roads. And that defined our objectives. Shane was talking about what your objectives are for road obliteration, for any of your restoration. Ours was to remove the impacts from roads. And the first one was removing the risk of mass failure or landslides associated with roads. We don't want to stop natural landslides. Reduce sedimentation and erosion associated with roads. Restore the hill slope hydrology. That's where we're trying to restore the function of the watershed, like Bethany was talking about. Restore the productivity of land. Eliminate unnecessary roads. The Clearwater is careful to define their goal for road obliteration as maintaining access rather than getting rid of access. There's so many roads, we can't maintain them. So let's get rid of the ones we can't afford to keep and focus our dollars on the roads that will now become important for access in the Clearwater, and ultimately to protect fisheries habitat. The process of road removal is complex. It starts with transportation planning. We do road survey, figure out the access and logistics, how are we going to get out to the road, what kind of equipment are we going to need. We do the actual earthwork following that, so that would be the implementation of it, mitigation to our restoration work, and monitoring. So how many roads do we need? This is a really typical road system in the Clearwater, particularly on the Lochsaw. There's probably, I'd say, 15 miles per square mile, if not more, roads in this drainage. Well, today, the Clearwater would say, maybe this one, the brightest white line is all we need for Watershed, and our program would obliterate all the roads in between, because you no longer need roads every 40 to 60 feet for modern logging sales or for recreation or anything. And we actually go out and survey the roads. Most people had forgotten that those were roads, so we go out and actually remap the roads. And I'll go through this quickly because I just got my 5-minute warning and I'm only halfway finished. It's the access and logistics. Our road removal treatments focus on Shane's level 5, so we're recontouring almost all of our roads. And this is what that looks like on the ground. Here's a road just after we cleared off the vegetation, and this is that road 2 years later. So it's totally recontoured. It looks like a mountain again. We also spend a lot of time reconstructing stream crossings. Those are roads, and this is a square. This is a mile right here. So in a square mile, there's over 65 miles of road in this drainage, and that's what it looks like on the land. We try to recreate natural channels with structures. We try to work our channels with as little impact as we can by working them dry and installing sediment traps below our work. We try to replant our stream. An excavator will do all this work for us. We use the cleared vegetation as natural mulch. We also use the excavator to plant native seeds from undisturbed ground above the road. And occasionally, if we have a heavily impacted system, we'll do some bioengineering with core fiber logs. We try to monitor all the work we do. This is an area that I encourage you to ask me questions about because I'm running out of time, but we're really just getting started on our monitoring. But from what we have done, we've learned quite a lot. And we also, this is what we did in cooperation with Wildland CPR. They started a wildlife monitoring, which hasn't been our focus at all. And we found that actually we are getting more people use on our roads now that they're obliterated than where they were before. Because previous to this, there would have been no horse on that road, I can promise you that. We've expanded our scope of work to doing culvert replacement, which Shane talked to you about, so you're going to see some before-after slides quickly, and also focusing on weed mapping and treatment of weeds. Oops, that was too quick. I know Vicki will let me get through the rest of these. This is before and this is after. We try to recreate natural channels with substrate in our culverts. Weeds, it's a huge problem. We're just really getting started thinking about it. And here's something we've learned from monitoring, that we're not always meeting our goals with road obliteration and road removal. In some cases, we're just providing that additional avenue for disturbance. And where we have knapweed before, we really have it after we've created a new disturbance. So this year we initiated a pilot project using goat grazing, and I think that has a lot of potential for these heavily infested areas. And we can talk about questions later. That's my supervisor.
Hi, I'm John Zelazney. I'm the Executive Director of Montana Trout, which is based here in Missoula. Montana Trout is an organization that I founded about 5 years ago. Its mission is pretty simple. We think that wild trout are pretty cool and we'd like to keep them around. So with that mission in mind, we've gone out and tried to get involved in a trout habitat repair, which has led us into watershed work, and that's really a whole other universe. And I was a little torn in getting ready for this talk tonight because what I've got here to show you are lots of pretty pictures about the projects that we've done, sort of the before and after and all that stuff. And I'll get to those in a second, but I wanted to just give you a couple thoughts about what we do and also about watersheds. Watershed restoration in Montana is really an inevitable thing to deal with. There's about 145,000 square miles in Montana. Of that 145,000, about 4% is a designated wilderness, another 6% or so is roadless, yet to be designated as wilderness, which leaves about 10%, or 90% rather, of Montana, which is 126.9 thousand miles. That remains to be dealt with, and in many respects, that's the environment that we all live in and we work in, and that needs all the love and care that we can give to it. From a watershed standpoint, if you don't know about it by now, Montana has a pretty active watershed movement. There's over 50 organizations around the state, watershed groups and councils that are basically made up of folks that live locally in places that you would never think, environmentally leaning watershed type folks would be living, but there's lots of them out there, and they're, as I said, they're statewide. This watershed movement is kind of unique because it represents, in many ways, management based on the most sensible unit of land out there, which is the watershed. We all live in watersheds. If you're going to understand what goes on in a watershed, then it's best to look at all the different factors involved, from precipitation and elevation and aspect and everything else. When Montana was just getting started going back in the 1870s and 1880s, John Wesley Powell, who also had fame for negotiating Colorado River and things like that, came and spoke to the territorial legislature, and he talked about the need to look at watersheds as a basic element of land use planning and management. John Wesley Powell was in many ways, not somebody that I like a whole lot in reading about because he was very utilitarian, and his main concern in watershed management was just that watersheds produce water that we use for ranching and farming, and also they produce timber, and that was the only use of them that he could see. Watersheds obviously have a lot of other uses and benefits, but in looking at watershed restoration overall, it's important to point out that it's still very early on in the whole evolution of it, that depending on who you talk to that's involved with watershed restoration, there's a key issue of benefit for some people. Watershed restoration just means producing more water for alfalfa crops or that kind of thing. Other people look at watershed restoration as getting closer to a pristine state that existed before people came along. So it's important to understand that that evolution is going on, and it needs very much to have the input of folks like y'all here tonight. Having rambled on about that, I'm going to move into these pictures here. And Cameron, if you can give me a rolling. Okay. Since Montana trout was founded, we've had 4 projects that have been completed to date. We hope to be involved with many more, but this is a quick summary of what we've done. And while each of these projects does sit within a watershed, and it certainly contributes to overall watershed restoration, I really can't say that watershed restoration was the driving factor behind them all. However, restoring the functionality of the trout habitat in these projects was, and that's something that comes to bear in any kind of watershed restoration activity. Our first project was up on Belmont Creek. This is a tributary of the Blackfoot River. Belmont Creek, if you go up to Johns Ridge Park and go on the dirt road, it's about 5 miles. That's where it takes off the Highway 200. There's a quick area map here. There's Missoula, and you can see in the circle there where Belmont Creek is located. This was the area of the project before we got started doing anything. Plum Creek had owned this. It had been fenced off and pastured and grazed and overgrazed, and that little strip of trees that you see there was all that remained of probably what was once very thick riparian forest, and there's something that's more than, say, 10 or 15 feet high. This was the species that was driving that project, bull trout, Zelazney, Stumpolinus. Belmont Creek is one of the most critical streams for spawning marine bull trout in the lower portion of Blackfoot. So restoring it was of prime importance to the recovery of the species. The neat thing about this project is that we used draft horses to move logs around. In a lot of projects you'll see the use of things like big excavators and big machines. We went through this approach primarily because draft horses have a very minimal trampling effect on the riparian undergrowth. Now, this wouldn't work in every situation. It certainly wouldn't work on a lot of the things that Rebecca just showed you, but in this situation it worked out quite well. Plus, it was awfully fun to be around these horses. That's what Belmont Creek looked like before our project, and as you can see, a bull trout would have a little bit of a challenge making it up through some of that. Our project, this is Joe Christensen, the BLM biologist that helped put this all together. Our project basically involved taking large wood like these trees right here and putting them into place. And so we wound up with, this is this same spot 2 years out. What happened to make this more profound is that beavers came along and built up the damming effects of all these little structures, so there's lots of still water dammed now, which is really not a bad thing. Beavers are a viable component of the ecosystem. Again, this is before, same spot after, kind of a profound change. And this is having added effect of increasing the water table within this meadow area, which in time will make this meadow basically a rain meadow supporting the wetland type species. Our next project was on Chamberlain Creek, just a little ways upstream of Belmont Creek. Chamberlain Creek is identified in the circle there. This is Plum Creek land, and when Plum Creek helped to develop this, one of the things that came about was this road that you see here. The road came right along the stream channel, which is right along in here. And doing that, the channel of Chamberlain Creek got straightened and reduced a lot of its complexity for this species, the west-slope cutthroat trout, which Chamberlain Creek is probably the most important spawn and marine stream for cutthroat trout in the Blacklead River drainage. So, in fact, the west-slope cutthroats that have been tagged and monitored from Milltown Dam have wound up spawning in Chamberlain Creek. So our desire was to basically increase the complexity and habitat quality of Chamberlain Creek. The way that this project went about doing that was to again use the team of draft horses that we used on Belmont Creek, stayed astern in there, and who helped us move around, and then this large wood that we put into the stream. We've had lots of large wood in the stream, and lots more large wood in the stream. And the result was, even though it looks like a terrible mess, when there's high water that moves through here, the water moves around and over all of these logs and trees and creates all sorts of little pools and little habitats that form little depositional areas for nutrients that wind up as places where insects can feed and in time drop the insects, and it's a much better environment. Again, Chamberlain Creek. This past spring we did a project here on Paddy Creek. The blue line represents the current channel of Paddy Creek within Missoula. This is a little bit older picture right now. This is a big apartment complex right here. That's the golf course that's in the middle of the university's crosshairs for elimination. And this is what remains of Paddy Creek, this nice straight line, which doesn't resemble much of a creek anymore. 1937 is a little bit different story. As you can see, a lot less development. And actually, the current flow of Paddy Creek doesn't resemble at all a flow that used to be in Paddy Creek, which I'm not really sure from this photo, because this is exactly where Paddy Creek went, but based on just looking at this and blowing it up, I'm pretty sure that it looked something along these lines here. As Paddy Creek got developed and the area built up and houses put in and so forth, Paddy Creek kept getting shoved over and over into becoming just a drainage ditch along the street. Well, it looks like a straight line. And this is what we came to deal with, was this basic structure right here. And here it is in Lester Park, just a little ways upstream. That configuration doesn't offer much for trout, and as hard as it is to believe, Paddy Creek is still home to populations of genetically pure native west-slope cutthroat trout. So this time we did not use the horse team. We went straight for the big guns, and the gun excavator out there working. And the idea was to restore sinuosity and some meander patterns that were consistent with the elevation of the area. This was during the project in Elms Park. You can see that we used actually some fiber blankets to help hold back the soil and define the channel and so forth. In Lester Park, we didn't go to that degree. We just installed some structures, but it was still a fair amount of work. And this is the finished product. That's Marnie right there is at home right now, sick, but she is occasionally on her feet, and that's what she looks like when she's on her feet. is a kind of a weird picture because it was in July right after the city of Missoula sent a weed whacker out to do some trimming work, and they inadvertently whacked all of our young shrubs that we carefully planted the spring before. So what these people are doing is replanting shrubs all along Paddock Creek. But you can see that it's a pretty profound change from the street ditch that was there before. This is right after the project was finished up on our Lester Park. And the final project I'm going to show you is when we just completed in August up on Willow Creek. This was a project that we were partnered with the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and also the Lloyd National Forest on. This is a quick picture of the Willow Watershed. Zula's up there. This is the Idaho border here. Willow Creek runs basically like this. And as you can see, the management of Willow Creek and the whole watershed is very problematic. If for nothing else, that you have all the sticker-boarded land, which is Plum Creek or private land, interspersed with the National Forest, makes management kind of a nightmare. But we're getting started, and this is the actual project site. If you drive up the Lolo, Highway 12 past the Lolo, going towards the Idaho border, you'll drive right by this site. This is the Earl Tennant Irrigation Area up in here. This is Highway 12. And as you can see, the creek right here, pretty flat. Not really any structures to speak of. Uniformly shallow, not very good habitat once again. Once again, we went to the big guns, and actually this is the exact same operator we have on Paddock Creek. And what he's doing here is installing a mixture of log vanes along the highway side. This is one of them here. These log vanes have the effect of pushing the stream back further away from the highway and reducing the erosion against the highway. Plus, these structures like this one here, which are going to provide pools and places for trout to hang out at. And I can guarantee you in a couple years' time, it's going to be a really excellent place to fish up in there. I'll be up there, but somebody well on shore. And I don't have any after pictures. I'll have to wait till next summer to get those. But this gives you an idea of some of the stuff that we install up there. This is one of the log structures, and this is a little cool area that they've got behind it. And similar to what happened up in Chernot Creek and basically all these projects that I've been associated with, when you have high water that comes in, you get currents that are going to come over this, come around it, and further develop these pools and holes and so forth to create a lot more diversity. Same thing up here. That's why you see so much of this up above where the water is going to reach it. Because a lot of the actual habitat producing work occurs during the 2 or 3 day high water period of each year. And one more shot of what we produced on Willow Creek. And with that, I'm done.
I think the plan is now to just open it up to questions from the audience. You can direct them directly to any individual on the panel up here. Anybody like to toss out some questions for some of our panel members? Yes?
I suppose anybody can answer this, but I've noticed there's a lot of roads being constructed in conjunction with these forest thinning projects. And a good example is like up above Bonner, you can see those roads being built. Bull Creek area. How do you feel these are affecting the watershed?
I think that he's on. Okay. Okay. One of the things that we've focused on with looking at road removal and road decommissioning is trying to separate this is a backwards way of answering your question, but trying to separate restoration work from logging work, because of the funding issues, a lot of road decommissioning forests on projects that don't have Bonneville Power Administration funding or other external sources of funding are tiered to timber sales. And that's a really, we don't support that at all, because you're not really solving the problem if you're going and building more roads, or if you can't take out your roads unless you're cutting timber. So one of the things we've been working on is trying to at least separate restoration from logging projects. But I guess I would say, in terms of answering your question more directly, that if roads are a problem, which I think you've heard a lot of people tonight say, then if you go into an ecosystem or to a watershed and you build a bunch of roads as part of a logging project, those roads will still be a problem unless they're taken out. And if they're taken out, you'll have less of a problem, but it also depends what the logging project looks like, what the overall impact to the watershed will be. I mean, they're tiered. I mean, in some instances, there could be benefits from doing some understory thinning, but in many, in other instances, you're causing additional damage by doing a logging project.
Well, in these projects, once the thinning is completed, do they decommission the roads then?
It totally depends on the project. I know, maybe Shane could talk about this. I know the Lola Forest does quite a few roll-up roads, so they'll go in and they'll do what they call roll-up roads. They build a very low capacity road that they can immediately take back out. A lot of the older roads that were built on the National Forest were built to a much higher capacity standard, but very few places use roll-up roads. A lot of the times the roads stay.
It depends on ownership, and then also different owners have different objectives for the roads, and then it also depends on the kind of landscape that it's built on. Sometimes when you build these roads on very steep terrain, it's very difficult, as Becca can tell us, on how it is to get rid of those roads. So it's very site dependent and very ownership dependent on what the long-term nature of that road staying on the landscape will be.
Okay, well, I'd say that these are national forests, these are roads within national forests, say they're being thinned, or these areas are being thinned. So this wouldn't be private land, this would be up to the Forest Service, and that's what I'm wondering.
I guess
look at this,
are we just perpetuating the problem with roads? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, I mean,
okay.
It is being perpetuated. The Forest Service, and maybe Shane or Becca would have different numbers, but the Forest Service has approximately 380,000 miles of roads on their forest system right now. They have another 60,000 miles or so of roads that are on the land that aren't on the system that they've identified. So they have about 440,000 miles of roads that they know at minimum exist. For the last 5 or 10 years, they've been stating that they've been building very few new roads, and they've been decommissioning more roads than they build. However, as we also heard, there's a lot of different definitions of what decommissioning is. On the Clearwater, decommissioning is equivalent to road obliteration. But in some instances, forests will take a road off of their map, but not take it off the land. And so overall, the Forest Service has remained about steady at about 380,000 miles of roads for the last 5 years or so, adding some roads and removing others. What that looks like on the land, we had an intern do a study a couple of years ago trying to identify what really was happening on the land with different road removal and what was happening in all the different regions. And there's no consistency throughout the country in terms of what they're doing with roads on national forest lands. So even though there's an understanding that roads are causing a lot of impacts, there is, and there are fewer roads being built than there used to be, the Forest Service is definitely still building roads and still building roads as part of thinning projects.
I'm going to shift to best management practices, or BMPs. And Shane, I guess, I didn't know this, but you're on the audit team for BMPs. That's for the state, the team that works for the state.
Yeah, they're joint teams between Forest Service, DNRC, Plum Creek, and private, well not necessarily private, but environmental groups were on there.
Well, I wanted to, on the restoration of the one slide you had, like 3 different categories. One of them was road obliteration, another was like culverts, another fish passage removal, I think. And the third was one where I think what Bethanie might have said was is the mitigation of the DMP upgrade, which really, are more or less, they're not necessarily restoration, but mitigation, BMP upgrades. Now I want to ask you about that because a lot of the time BMPs are said to be implemented during timber or other projects where roads are put in or where impacts are happening. And that suggested that BMPs are something that that aren't permanent, that don't work forever, that have to be upgraded or something. Can you address that? Long-term, short-term?
Sure. My philosophy on DMPs is they're a mechanism to reduce the impact from an activity, particularly in a logging situation where you have an existing road that is below BMP standards and you want to haul down it. And we know that as you increase the amount of traffic on that road, you're going to increase the rate of sediment delivery from that road as well. So you can bring that road up to BMP standards and mitigate that impact. So instead of having sediment that is going directly into the channel, now you can reduce that up to 80 to 90% by implementing a series of BMP practices. In that scenario, I would not call that a restoration practice. To me, that's a mitigative practice. But if you were to go and do that same work without the haul activity, that, in my mind, is a restoration type activity. You're no longer trying to mitigate an impact that's happening. You're mitigating an existing condition. You're moving it towards a desired condition. So it's really a subtle difference. But I do think a lot of BMPs can be a restorative action. But at the same time, they can be a mitigative action as well.
Well, the second part of the question was, how long do those things last? I mean, how often? Because you have a lot of maintenance, yearly maintenance. On another slide, it showed you had to go in periodically.
It depends on the activity. Slash filter windrows can last 10 to 15 years before they start to decay. Rolling dips can last quite a while because they're part of the road maintenance program. As the grader goes over, they can help maintain that structure in the road. Increasing culvert sizes lasts a very long time. Gravel, the quality of the gravel is very dependent on the pit, but that can last 10 to 20 years most likely, depending on the quality. So each BMP does have a limited lifespan and does require maintenance to it.
We hear a lot of talk in the media, maybe the past 4 or 5 years, about healthy forests. And in fact, it seems like the Bush administration, they're really just packaging their approach to national forest management under the catchy phrase of the Healthy Forests Initiative. It's interesting, having spent some time looking at this, we don't see watershed restoration really fitting into part of the healthy forest equation. It seems to be an initiative to reduce public process and to really streamline some of the environmental laws to do more logging and even allow more road building. But it seems as if, looking at, and this ties into the funding a little bit, because we hear a lot of talk about healthy forests, but we're kind of not seeing the money put towards things such as what all the panelists are talking about today, which I think most of us would say watershed restoration is a critical component, if not the most important component of a healthy forest. So I was interested by the slide that you had, Shane, just showing how little funding the Lolo National Forest gets per year to do watershed restoration. It was maybe about $200,000 a year, and I'm sure, as a fisheries biologist, your dream budget could be in the $20 to $30 to $50 million a year. I guess my question to all of you is, how can we get Congress and the administration in the federal government, because a lot of what we were talking about in the examples were taking place on federal public lands, how can we wake those folks up? I was just in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks ago tried 4 times 2 weeks prior to get a hold of Senator Baucus's office to talk about this Upper Lolo Watershed Restoration Project, which was referenced. Project that, as Bethany points out, these projects provide jobs, they improve our watershed. Senator Baucus's office would not even return my phone calls and would not even want to meet to talk about a watershed restoration project. So how do we make those people in Washington, D.C. listen and see that there are people ready to get to work that want to do this watershed restoration work, but there's no funding for it, and we need to figure out a way to get millions and millions of dollars out on the ground to put people to work improving our water quality and fish habitat. So how do we make them listen to the good work that you folks are doing and make sure that we can increase it 10 and 20-fold?
Do you want to jump on that one?
I'll try. I mean, obviously, I don't have the answer. No one does to that question. I think where Bethany and Wildland CPR were headed into pointing out that restoration, you know, it can't replace logging per se, what these logging communities used to be in terms of providing resources and monies into these local communities, but it does provide living wages, more than living wages. And I think for our, you know, state senators here in the West, hearing from those people is what ultimately will catch their ear, because as you know, the climate right now is very easy for our politicians to ignore the environmental community. There's very little power to the environmental community right now. And, you know, that's a national crisis, and, you know, we can point fingers for who's to blame for that all night long, but that's the situation that it is. But people that do have a voice are these local communities, and there does seem to be a lot of concern in Congress about how to keep these Western communities viable. And Jobs in the Woods, to me, is one critically important way of getting their attention. The problem we face is most of the people that have the most credibility speaking about Jobs in the Woods. I don't have much credibility, but my excavator operator does. They're the kind of people that, you know, the idea of talking to anyone, you know, politically is horrifying. You know, it's such a great risk for them. So I think that's the question, how to make that case and make it credibly, so it's not seen as just another polarized act, you know, environmental versus resource extraction, and you're perpetuating this, you know, fake war that, you know, is hurting all of us. So I don't have the answer, but I think that's an important component of getting political attention today. You know, the other critical component is, you know, watching species that people value go extinct, and that's where my money comes from. You know, people, not just environmentalists, but everyone in Idaho values salmon one way or another, and it's certainly culturally important to the Nez Perce tribe. And when people start to feel that loss, you know, at a real personal level, then that's when they start to call their congresspeople. The question is, you know, what's the threshold? You know, will it be too late for most people to start making that pitch, or, you know, can we educate people now, and they can understand where we're headed if we don't take this kind of restoration action, you know? And so education maybe is the other component of that.
I'd like to take a crack at, I'm assuming this works.
Look towards you.
The top, over here. There's a little slide.
Okay. It's not gonna like come at me or anything. You know, I'm not an expert in forest ecology or the Healthy Forest Initiative. I'm like most folks, I know what I read in the paper and see on the news. My sense of kind of what drives the whole Healthy Forest Initiative is based on the idea that remove fire as a component from ecosystems in the West, and as a result, all of our forests are horribly overgrown, and unless we go in and do major thinning, that everybody's house is going to burn down. And that's being used for a whole range of efforts. Some may be legitimate, some maybe not so legitimate, but to condone various types of the forest practices. That's something that, you know, the current administration and people in power have seen fit to pursue, but I see a major disconnect between that and what's going on in Montana right now with this watershed movement. This effort of 50 groups and councils so far and growing seems to me to be by far the most progressive effort to sort of empower local people with the ability to help influence what goes on in their watershed. And even though I have lots of respect for my partners in the Forest Service and other agencies, their boundaries only extend so far. And for most watersheds in Montana, the typical arrangement is you have public lands in the higher parts of the watershed, and the lower parts of the watershed are all private. And if you're really going to do things to influence what goes on in that watershed, you've got to have local people involved in helping to determine what the values and benefits desired are. Out of that process, you know, thank God we still live in a democracy, and out of that process I could see the political machinery for helping to make some of these things happen where funding is more appropriately tiered towards what needs to happen on the ground. And part of that is an educational process too. It's only now, I mean, here, 2005, that people are really appreciating what the full range of benefits watersheds have to offer are. Ideal at trout, which is one very small part of a benefit in certain watersheds in the West. It's by no means the only benefit. And I look at these watershed groups and councils as means to get people at the very lowest grassroots level aware and inspired and desirous of making change happen. And I don't really know how else you're going to pull it off, because in this day and age, I think, you know, environmental causes are too easily marginalized and pushed off. I mean, even in the case of the recent tragedy in Louisiana, where we've lost the whole city of New Orleans, basically. There's a rush to go back in and rebuild exactly what was there, not pay attention to things like the loss of barrier islands and the dredging of the lower Mississippi, which anybody that knows anything about stream channels and the way water works will tell you that's a major problem with Louisiana and why we have flooding going on down there. And I use that as an example of just how easily marginalized environmental type issues are. If I was to go out and say, well, geez, you shouldn't just be in a hurry to go rebuild levees around the world. You should really get barrier island building instead. You know, I'd quickly be dismissed as some sort of environmental kook, I guess. I certainly wouldn't be on CNN at the 8 o'clock news with somebody interviewing me saying this is, you know, a holy and most important point of view. And the only reason I bring that up is that I think we're looking at kind of a continuum here where, you know, we started not too many years back with we just lived in places, and now there's an effort going on where people are starting to be more mobilized around watershed action and watershed restoration. The agencies like the Forest Service are gradually changing to appreciate the fact that you know, watershed management is really where the focus ought to be, and not just on, you know, getting the cutout or whatever. And my hope is certainly that in 15 to 20 years we see swing back to that side of the pendulum. Whether it'll happen or not, I guess I'm in Rebecca's camp. I don't really have the answer. My crystal ball doesn't always work that reliably, but I think these watershed groups and councils are in many ways the best bet to move forward in the future.
I have a comment and a question for Rebecca. My comment is that I thought it was cool that the NESPERS is working on the lands outside of their national boundary. And I think, even though it seems obvious the way maybe the watershed work, it's also pretty neat that you guys are getting funds and then using them off of the reservation to improve the lands for don't directly own. And I think that's kind of a neat lesson and a way to think about it. I wondered, since it's such a professional and skilled type of work you're doing up there, are you training the NESPERS folks to work? Is that who you're employing out there? And is that becoming like a real important source of work and income for the folks there? And if so, it's maybe a real long-term thing.
Okay, a couple of points. The first one, the current reservation, the boundary set in 1863, is the Canada, Lapway, around towards Lewiston area. We're still working within the treaty territory, and so technically we're in NESPERS tribe treaty territory where they've maintained their rights, and Entitlement Act as a co-manager with federal government, but it is absolutely a visionary spirit that the NESPERS tribe has, that they have dedicated so many resources to restoration from the headwaters down to the bottom of the river in the Columbia. As far as employing tribal members, I have employed many tribal members in the past, and the fisheries department, which is where the watershed department is housed, is an incredibly important employer of NESPERS tribal members. But the unemployment rate, the tribe still remains very high. And you were getting at one of the problems I always struggle with is there is not a very highly skilled workforce. We've employed just about every tribal member we can that's interested in fisheries management and has any kind of background. And in addition, we started a huge education program where we're really trying to start from the ground up in the elementary schools and middle schools and creating internships for tribal members and taking them all the way through college. So, because I believe, this is just my opinion, that really the future of watershed restoration will absolutely depend on tribal involvement. Because if, let's say, the salmon, I know this is crazy, might get taken off the endangered species list and all my money were to go away, well, I will leave and find some other job somewhere. But the tribe will still be here, and salmon will still be culturally important to the tribe. And the stewards of the land that we're helping to train now in the highly technical skills, who already have this cultural importance of restoration, they'll be the people here that will carry this project forward. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's critically important that we continue to train and employ tribal members. It's one of the most important goals of my work.
Can I just add as another example where this has worked? The Karuk tribe in Northern California has actually also got a bunch of variety of different funding sources to do road removal on a road called the Steinecker Road, which was a very large road, millions of dollars to remove 7 miles of road, not a $3,000 a mile road removal project. And the tribe, and I'm just trying to get the right information, they got the Karuk and the Northern California Indian Development Council secured more than $1 million from 7 different sources to fund the project. And they initiated a comprehensive watershed restoration training and implementation program for tribal members. So they did exactly what you're asking about. All of the employees were all of the people doing the work were tribal members. They taught the tribal members how to use the excavators, how to use the bulldozers, and unfortunately, their funding has not continued from those 7 different sources. But there is an opportunity if funding could be more readily available, kind of going back to Matthew's question, which gets into a lot of much bigger political issues, then there is an opportunity to look at this as a way to kind of expand on what Becca's talking about and to look at some of the examples. Just to give two more statements from here, the goal was to prepare members of a tribal restoration division for careers as watershed restoration specialists while supplying on-the-job apprenticeships, completing critical restoration work on projects throughout the tribe's ancestral territory. So their goal is to engage in this work over the long haul and have it be a source of employment for tribal members. It still is only employing 30 or 40 tribal members out of, a large tribe, but that's better than nothing.
This is kind of a big scale question. I don't know if anybody's willing to tackle this one or not. I know we've been talking a lot tonight about watershed restoration, especially in small streams. A lot of which are spawning areas and very, very critical. I'm not arguing. But do you think this watershed restoration work that we do in such small segments out here is really going to have a massive impact on the fish populations, even with things like the Columbia River Dam and other downstream obstacles to them making their migrations back up?
Importantly, the hydro system, the 8 dams on the Columbia, at least from where I work, there's other dams on the Snake River as well. So my work is targeted on improving the life stage of the salmon from egg to smolt. And that's the only part of the habitat that I can control. But without removal of at least the 4 Snake River dams, we really are fighting, I don't know if it's a losing battle, but the progress is not going to be measurable because, the ultimate goal is to have the salmon return and use the habitat that we're improving. And if they can't get past the dams, or when they're immigrating out, their rates of survival are so low, then we aren't going to look at a self-sustaining salmon population. So yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's something that I'm not afraid to answer, and I think we just need to be honest. That's what we're talking about.
To take it one step further, it's really kind of a species-specific problem. With the marine fisheries, the anadromous fisheries, there's problems that go so far beyond just the habitat at the extreme upper parts of watersheds, like Rebecca works on. And I don't know if those problems are ever going to be solvable, but closer to home, with the pending removal of Milltown Dam, is an excellent illustration of a huge step forward in watershed restoration that's going to benefit native fisheries. In particular, the stuff on Blackfoot that I've been working on, the Belmont Creek and Chamberlain Creek, are both going to see huge upswings in the amount of fish that are able to even access those streams once they can get past Milltown Dam, which has been a huge barrier to upstream movement for 100 years now. So it's not exactly a black and white question. All fish are losers. Some fish species will come out ahead through watershed restoration. Other species, just by virtue of their life cycle and where they're located, aren't going to do nearly as well.
I think it's also important to remember that watershed restoration benefits terrestrial species. Almost all the road removal on the Flathead National Forest, which is under court order, the Flathead National Forest is under court order to remove almost 1,000 miles of roads for grizzly bears. And they've removed a couple hundred miles. They're way behind. They were supposed to be done this year. But elk benefit tremendously, wolves, lynx, all those species. So yeah, the dams are a huge issue, but like John said, it is species specific, and these things benefit both the terrestrial species and the fish. And interestingly, on the Flathead, when they wrote the amendment to the forest plan, even though that amendment was based on grizzly bears, they included language regarding bull trout, because it was being done mostly for a single species. But they said, well, if we're going to figure out that we need to, if we're going to remove roads, let's make sure it benefits the bull trout as well. So let's try to make it, let's look at both the terrestrial and the aquatic impacts there.
I just want to mention that a lot of the work in the Lolo that Shane works on, even though bull trout aren't necessarily, the Lolo Creek watershed is considered now to be part of the critical habitat for bull trout, primarily because of a political decision, because Plum Creek owns so much land in the Lolo watershed, and Plum Creek has their own habitat conservation plan, which allows them to get out from under some of the constraints of the Endangered Species Act. The Forest Service is still mandated to follow the instructions of the Endangered Species Act, and a lot of the watershed work that Shane is working on is geared towards greatly increasing the quality of habitat for bull trout in that area. Again, there's definitely species that are going to come out way ahead.
Kind of expanding on that question, one threat that sort of transcends both forest management and watershed restoration is climate change, and I'm just wondering, in terms of where the agencies and sort of where we in the non-governmental community, just in terms of keeping more water around, there seems to be a need to justify some of the restoration just based on, having enough water, for fish. So just a quick comment on, sort of where climate change fits in.
I do think it fits in. It's just part of that holistic approach of watershed restoration. It may never be the driving factor behind doing a project, but I think it's one of those indirect benefits that will occur as a spin-off, I guess. Whether it's the road restoration, restoring that inner-ground water network connectivity rather than it coming out and hitting the road and running right off. It's going to stay back in the ground longer and return that hydrologic process to more normal. And so in an indirect way, I think it will help, but the climate change is such a huge thing. It's not like we're going to be able to change that with these kind of restoration projects. We can return it to a more proper functioning condition, I guess. But that's probably about it.
What I see happening with regard to climate change is that there's also an evolutionary aspect to that, as inconceivable to anybody that it is, to anybody that follows the science. There's still lots of people out there that don't admit that there's such a thing as global warming and climate change and so forth. But as that whole concept gets to be more legitimized and is brought more into the mainstream of thinking, I think you'll see that climate change is a big factor in planning and prioritizing where watershed restoration has to occur. And there'll be a lot more effort placed on figuring out which drainages are going to be, the primary producers of water, which ones are going to be kind of marginal drainages, more drought influenced, and consequently less valuable in terms of restoration. I hate to look at it as callously as that, but I think inevitably we're moving towards that kind of a situation where we're going to see profound impacts in terms of the wet and dry areas of the world, and that individuals involved in watershed restoration simply has to include things like global warming impacts as part of their planning. Otherwise, why sink several hundred thousands of dollars into a project that's going to wind up being a drought area in 10 or 15 years' time?
So the Arctic grayling in Montana are doomed?
Well, you'll have to talk to other people besides me about that. I don't know about Arctic grayling.
Some of the projects that I've not necessarily done, but been in association with in the Blackfoot, they're starting to see some water yield increases through restoring the wetlands. Wetlands being the sponges that they are in the slow release So they're starting to put a lot more effort into wetland restoration and restoring that groundwater connectivity, basically, in conjunction with the stream restoration. And together those two are really producing some fabulous results in directly to fish populations, because we are getting colder water and flow for a greater period of time throughout the summer. So I mean, there can be certain specific projects that can target water yield restoration.
I think we have time maybe for one more question.
Do you do any sort of lab analysis about the soils or sediments in the rivers and streams while you're doing this, and maybe a little subwater aquifers that are underneath the streams? Like the Lolo Creek, I think there's been a few spills into that drainage.
I guess I'm not understanding the question. The monitoring related to the project or soil?
Well, when you're restoring a stream, an old stream, and how do you know if the trout are going to be healthy, sort of chemically, if there's whatever heavy metals in the sediments of these streams? Do you think about that, or is there any?
Yeah, you know, I don't know that it's done with every project, but we have a good idea of where we have heavy metal problems, which drainages, you know, like the Mike Horse Dam issue. Those have been well known about for quite some time. When you do projects in those areas, I guess one case I can think of in down by Superior, some of the roads were made out of mine tailings down there from some historical. And
determining those factors.
Yeah, and you know, definitely there's a lot of historical knowledge about that, and when that comes into play, then we have to deal with that and mitigate those issues.
Do you do any history research like the Lolo Creek, the Lolo River? There's been a numerous little spills and so forth over that. That went into the river.
Yeah,
at one time it decimated all the fish in there.
You know, I haven't researched any of the spill history in that drainage. John, have you looked into any of that or stumbled onto any of that in your research?
Not yet. Doesn't surprise me. It's a major highway right along Lolo Creek. It's probably one of the major arterials for east to west traffic. Got through your area too.
Yeah, interestingly, you weren't headed in this direction, but we do have, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of mining issues, although there is a mine proposed where I work, and that could become an issue. But the major water chemistry problem where I work is lack of nutrients. As if you think about it, I work in salmon drainages, and there used to be hundreds of thousands of salmon that would spawn and then die along the riverbanks, and that whole nutrient impact from the salmon that's almost completely removed from the ecosystem. And there is some research, we don't really fully understand what the long-term impacts of removing that kind of nutrient pulse is to the productivity of our streams long-term. But there is an interesting study that is talking about how it has effects to all the terrestrial, not just the transition zone between the stream, but as the grizzly bears would eat the salmon, they would take those nutrients. And we're seeing a marine nutrient pulse in some of our old growth trees, hundreds of yards away from the stream. And so, I think it's something we haven't really studied, we don't really understand, but in terms of water chemistry, that's something that we probably should be thinking about. How are we going to restore that component of the ecosystem without the salmon there?
One of our organizers assures me he has a very short question.
Just a quick one. Shane, you showed a photo of barriers to fish passage in the northern region. And I had to figure in my head that 95% of culverts or fish passages being impeded on the Lolo National Forest. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not. But do you have some number or some idea what the extent is either in the northern region or on the Lolo National Forest of these barriers to fish passage?
Yeah, I've got a whole presentation on that. Actually, the percentage is 80 to 84% throughout the northern region. We just completed a regional assessment on that which I pulled all the data together for 12 different national forests. I forget the total number that we surveyed. It was like 2,000 structures or so. About 80 to 84% of those were, by our definition of what fish passage, were upstream barriers to juvenile and adult cutthroat trout.
Turn myself back on again, and it occurred to me as I was listening that I wanted to say a little bit in the way of contrasting two big river restoration projects that are going on in Montana right now, both of them paid for, interestingly enough, by ARCO, of all people. One is the restoration of Silverbow Creek up on the headwaters of the Clark Fork, and the other is the restoration of the Jocko River by the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. Once again, they're both paid for by settlement money from ARCO. And they have some things in common and some things that are very different about them. Silverbow Creek is mainly a big earth-moving project because there's just a lot of contamination that has to be moved out of the floodplain, and then the stream is going to be, with the aid of bulldozers and so on, put back into a fairly natural meandering pattern, but also allowed ultimately in the long term to change its course and meander across its floodplain. It's putting a lot of out-of-work miners to work, driving the heavy equipment to do that restoration. So they've all been turned into restoration scientists, these out-of-work miners. In contrast, up in the Jocko River Basin, the tribe is doing some earth moving, but really not very much. They're going to use the majority of their money to purchase land and purchase conservation easements and change land use practices on that land, moving cattle further from the stream, fencing cattle out of the stream, providing them with off-stream watering, changing grazing practices to a great extent, and also leasing water that historically has been used for irrigation, leasing as much as they can back to maintain in-stream flows. So changing land and water use practices so as to reduce the major impacts of those land uses, and then allowing the stream to naturally recover itself as much as possible. Again, there's a little bit of what we call earth-moving type restoration work going on. It's fairly sophisticated and directed at trying to raise the water table back up again after it was dropped because of channelization and so on. And quite a lot of revegetation using native species. And once again, as much as possible, using tribal members to do a lot of that work and training them in revegetation and restoration techniques to provide them with long-term employment and skills and so on. So I guess I'll have to, at this point, chime in as to what I think is the biggest threat to watersheds, and that's just sprawling development. And while Montana has on the books some types of land use protection regulations, and here in Missoula County we have some even stronger ones, still they're of course frequently not very vigorously enforced. If there's not public support for them, then it's very hard for our public officials to vigorously support those land use regulations. And that to me is probably one of the single most important things that we need to do to restore and conserve watersheds, is to get a handle on this galloping development that's, a lot of people are moving up to this area, and a lot of baby boomers are going to retire and think that this is a great place to retire to. And of course, if the administration doesn't give away all their Social Security, they may actually be able to accomplish doing that. So I would like to thank our organizers tonight, our David Mildrexler here, Cameron Nafisi, and Matt Kaler over there, who put on this event. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight and being interested in watershed restoration. I hope you'll all make it to the next forum, which is the Healthy Forest Policy, which will take place here on October 25th. And now we can thank our panel and our organizers. Thank you much.